It is 12:01. Let's go ahead and get started. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Kenya Burrell-VanWormer, and that voice behind the camera is my partner in crime, Kat Winston. We are co-founders of Equity Angels, and we're so glad that you've joined us for today's session about building effective startup teams in 2025. At Equity Angels, we connect with founders daily who face tough choices about growing their teams. One truth stands out. The future of work is flexibility, not rigidity. We have two outstanding experts with us today, Jenn Longbine and Kelly White, who will share real insights about modern hiring. They'll show you why skills can be taught, but attitude, values, and energy determine true success. We'll also explore how fast-growing companies are using fractional hiring and looking beyond technical skills to build strong teams. In the next hour, we'll cover four key areas. The first is planning and strategy, when to hire, how to budget, and making smart growth decisions for your company. The second one is the hiring process, creating attractive packages and finding the right talent. And the third will be retention and growth, building strong teams and keeping top performers. And then at number 4, future trends, what to expect in 2025 and beyond. We want this to be a valuable session for everyone today. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. We're going to check that throughout the webinar today. And now we're going to meet our experts. Going to turn it over to our experts to introduce themselves, starting with Jenn.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jenn Longbine. I am so excited to be here and have this conversation specifically with you all today. Very much near and dear to my heart. I have been in HR and talent acquisition for about 25 years. I'll tell a brief story because I think it's relevant in my intro here for you all to know. But the first probably 20 years I spent in FAANG companies. So I spent 10 with Starbucks, 11 with Apple, 4 with Nike. And then civil unrest began here in Portland, Oregon, where I was based at the time. And I started to feel that, nerves of, uh-oh, Nike's going to do layoffs. I can feel it coming. And this is a small town, right? Where should I work? And so working with an executive placement agent, he gave me some tough love. He said, you know what? I might have trouble placing you because you've only worked at these big companies and people have a real bias against that. And that was the first I'd heard of that, which might sound naive, but just being super transparent. And I thought, gosh, I wonder if that's true. I don't know what I don't know. And I think I said to him, let's get weird. And that began my journey into sort of learning, scope and scale of different types of companies. I spent some time at a private equity held mid-sized SaaS organization, got to go and be on the purchased side of an M&A with Slack as they went into Salesforce, and then just spent the last 3 years building a very interesting software-defined vehicle startup with Toyota. And so I feel like now I've checked all the boxes in terms of kind of company size. I've gone from, a company that may not make it to now a top 18 Toyota portfolio company, which is really exciting. So I feel like I'm coming off the heels of a lot of learning, and I'm excited to share those things with you all today.
We're excited to have you. Thank you so much. And Kelly?
Hi, so happy to be here. My name's Kelly Ray White, and I actually am a business owner specializing in executive coaching. And I've created the Career Formula program where I help people with career transitions, job search, and then leadership coaching. The interesting thing, though, is in thinking about this conversation is I realized that the majority of my background has been in some kind of startups and or in staffing. So I was thinking about this yesterday, that I started my career in temporary staffing right out of college. And it was one of the best things that I've ever done because I had multiple different placements that I had to do under a time crunch. And at the time, we didn't have computers, so it was also very manual. And I realized that I had a knack for being able to place people in the right positions. And so that kind of has followed me throughout my career. I had the great fortune of working in a startup at the time, which was Keller Williams Realty International. I think I was like the number 8 employee there. And it was I think they had 1,500 agents, and Gary Keller was my boss. And so I had this great opportunity of working in a company that in that trajectory during that period of time, it was growing so much exponentially. And I learned a lot about working in a startup. We created all the hiring systems there. And so really had just a full education in that. I've also now realized that each opportunity I had was a startup, even if it was in a large organization. And I really gravitate towards starting, building, and systematizing. And so probably like many of you, I'm currently in a startup phase myself. I'm in my own business as a solopreneur. And I'm actually, ironically, at a point where I'm about to hire my first person too. So I feel like I'm right there in the game, and excited to share anything that I can with you all about, hiring and anything y'all want to talk about.
That's fantastic. So we definitely have a well-rounded group of experts today. So looking forward to dive into some of these questions. I'm going to start with you, Jen. What are the key signs that tell a startup it's time to hire versus using contractors or fractional talent?
It's such a great question and a pivotal moment. I mean, I think there are a lot of, answers that are more metric driven or KPI driven on this. I feel personally very differently. So I'll share that. I think those things, while those things matter, it's really about, in my opinion, coming to a point of view on your culture. How is it supposed to feel to work there? What kind of people work there? When I meet you, what vibe does that put off, right? When you start to really picture those elements for your organization, and usually it's because a culmination of your founding leaders have kind of created a feel or created an energy. Is there a sense of humor? Are we very buttoned up and professional? Are we, sort of, what does this look like? Are we fully remote? Are we hybrid? Kind of thinking about what are those things that really establish how it feels to work here? And that's when you're going to start noticing, gosh, my contracting recruiter is just not quite getting the candidates that I want now, or my fractional hire is just not quite representing us in the way that I wanted to on their profile because they're shared, with other resources. And so I think it's really that moment when you're like, okay, we know who we are and we can picture it. And that's when you go and find a recruiter that matches that energy so that you're not just telling candidates who you are and what you're going to be like, but you're really giving, the front line, the feel that you want to attract. Like will attract like, especially in those early days when you're very unknown still to the talent pool.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Culture is very important with that process as well. So I'm glad that you did touch on that. Kelly, how should startups start thinking about budgeting for new hires, especially when resources are tight? We all know that you're bootstrapping in those early days, but you also need the help so you can take the business to the next level. What recommendations do you have there?
Yes, well, as a small business owner, I'm in that exact situation right now. So I think that, I would love to say, like, think about your organizational design ahead of time and what you are thinking that you're going to need as you get to different points in your revenue forecasting. But then what I think that you do, and I'm literally exactly in this situation, is I told myself I need a certain revenue run rate for so many months in a row before I'm going to invest in my first hire. And so I just think if you can have a revenue number associated with it, I will also say that I'm in that moment now where it's a little bit uncomfortable because I have enough a business coming in that I'm like, wow, I really need the help. And so the other thing is when resources are tight, think about things that you can do to help yourself that might not be you might not even be hiring a contractor or a full-time employee. So I've gotten through the last couple of months by using a friend that I have that can help me in some of it's not even admin, but I do a lot of resume development. And so she can help me in that. And I'm just paying her by the resume that she helps me with, but I'm not committed to having a full-time VA or a full-time admin or something like that. And now I'm finally in that place where my revenue is stable enough that I am able, after knowing I have that run rate for a certain period of time, that I'm not going to do the cycles, that I'm producing the leads, that I've got the closings, that I've got the clients, that now I feel like it's the right time to invest in that next person.
That makes sense. No, that makes a lot of sense because you're doing it on an as needed basis, which really kind of ties into what fractional can look like. So Jen, let me ask you this. Do you have any examples of how companies are using fractional hiring effectively, similar to how Kelly is? Like you're ready for that next person, but you're not really ready to commit full time.
It's interesting too, because I think it depends on your stage of company, how I feel about this answer. But in a startup specifically, honestly, I would limit fractional hiring to executive level.
Okay.
And for a handful of reasons, I think, but one of them is you're still kind of storming, you're not norming yet, right? Like you're still figuring it out and kind of breaking things down. And when you have someone fractional, they're not with you enough or sort of giving their full thought to you enough. If they're a more junior person, it's harder to compartmentalize and be as effective. executive. Versus if you go for a fractional executive, honestly, my recommendation is go for someone late career, because you're always going to get someone who has seen it a bunch of different ways. And so the time that you get from them tends to be more productive, first of all, because they're coming to you with more years of experience. The other thing I would recommend is to find a very trusted source for fractional talent rather than trying to go out there and source or hunt yourself. Highly recommend Chief as an example, as an organization. Chief specifically is an organization of VP plus women. And there are a lot of women within that community that do fractional work and are open to fractional work for a myriad of reasons. But I think, really targeting the people who have had a lot of success and a great track record doing what it is that you're trying to do.
That makes sense. And it also helps lead into understanding which role should you start hiring first, right? So is it the executive, right, with the experience, or do we need some people to really start from the ground up? And Kelly, I was going to ask you, what role should a startup prioritize, or is there really a one-size-fits-all solution to that type of question?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it depends on, multiple factors. Are you a solopreneur and you're bootstrapping, or do you have capital, right? I think those are two different scenarios. But the things that I've seen first on the side where maybe there's capital involved, I see sometimes companies where they'll invest in, leadership, almost too much leadership versus people that can actually do the work. And I think these are similar themes that I'll talk about. But you really do need to have people who have capacity and are able to help you execute on the vision. So if you get too top heavy with, not that leaders won't execute, but you want to make sure you have people that can do strategy and execute, right? Now on the bootstrap, where maybe it's just like my situation, you're a solopreneur and you're scaling, is I've heard it a couple of different ways and it really resonates with me, which is you don't want to give up your dollar productive activities. So when you get to the point where your sales calls are down or whatever, that is the time that you should hire. And the first hire should be something admin so that you can leverage yourself first. And the other thing I heard recently, so two examples of that might resonate is one is, with a real estate agent team, often they go hire a buyer's agent first without realizing that buyer's agent's going to bring business, but they don't have an admin to support it. So they should get the admin first. The other thing I also heard recently, and this one, I don't know why I hadn't thought of it, but if you hire because I was thinking maybe I should hire a marketing person, but that marketing person I talked to was like, the point of marketing is that you're going to have more demand and more leads. And if you're at a point where you're already kind of almost maxed out on that, you really need to make sure you have your admin covered first. So both of those are similar from the standpoint of make sure that you get your leverage through admin and execution first before you bring in more business or bring in more leaders that are going to bring in more business.
That's true. It seems like one position really goes with the other, depending on where you are in the process, which leads us to the hiring process. So once you've determined exactly who you need, Kelly, what are some ways that you can bring somebody on creatively and still stay within a reasonable budget, but yet attract the type of talent that you need and want for your venture?
Yeah, I think there's so many ways that you can go about doing that. It really, I think, depends on number one, it all starts with, what are you looking for and what is it that you want them to do? One of the biggest mistakes that I see is people do not have clearly defined roles of what they want someone to do first. But then, you can offer some kind of, equity opportunity. But I think for a lot of people, it's really about they want the flexibility to be able to have autonomy. Maybe they, working remote or hybrid is something. But also people like the soft benefits, right? Like more time off. They love benefits like, gym memberships and, things like that. But I think what's most attractive to people right now is that flexibility, having time off, being able to really grow, being in a situation with someone who's going to really help you grow and develop and have a career path. I mean, it is so rare. So even just the ability to explain what that person's career path might be with you is a competitive advantage. So I think just really sitting down and thinking, if you don't have the base compensation, like what are the different things that might be appealing to different types of people, right? Like I know we talked about this yesterday, but I work with a lot of people that are in the 55 plus age group. And what's attractive to them actually is they want to be involved in something and bring their expertise. But a lot of times they actually don't need that base compensation that you might think that they need. And they just want to be plugged in to something that makes them feel good, where they can offer their expertise. They want to stay, they want to contribute. So there's a lot of just that knowing that you can contribute and add value is really important. So I think it's the package, but it's also the like culture that Jen spoke to, and like just, you helping them be who they want to be, whatever that is.
Well, that makes sense. And Jen, you did bring up something really interesting about culture and culture fit and what that means. And even with Kelly mentioning, there is a segment of the population that has a lot of experience. That means something, right? Leadership means something. What specific traits do you look for, Jen, when you are looking for long-term success and even short-term success opportunities with hires?
It's a great question, and again, maybe I look at it a little bit differently, but I think regardless of industry, you said culture fit, and I love to think about it as a culture match. And it's sometimes you definitely need to match the culture of sort of the company, but I think of that as more of a value proposition conversation. Hopefully you've sat down and said, okay, these are our 5 values that, no matter what happens, these are our attributes that we're gonna, stick with. Great. Make sure that your hires all have that, right? But then there's this concept of matching, thinking about it as a yin and yang when you think about especially manager and an employee, right? People don't quit companies. They're going to quit a bad manager. And I think oftentimes in a startup environment, in my experience, what I've seen is sometimes the founding leadership team don't possess the behavioral competencies that the later version of that role is going to require. One good example of that, I think, is Woven by Toyota, the startup that I just helped build. James Kuffner was our founding CEO. He's one of the brightest minds probably that we'll share the planet with in our lifespan. He's come up with things that humans can't figure out how to do. It was so inspiring to work with him. But James isn't known best for running a business. So when the company got to the point where we were ready to produce what we had invented, there was a CEO change, right? And someone came in who has a long track record of really kind of earning money, right? And running the business, which is a very different skill set. So that's just one example of, first of all, looking inward at ourselves, making sure we've got the right kind of foundation for who we're going to hire. If we don't, there's kind of, you may turn your people quickly and have been spinning your wheels. Then the other thing I'll look for then again is so I've got my hiring manager and I'm thinking about, who is this person really? Like, how is this person going to manage people? Are they the person who wants to coach and develop and they want to build a relationship? Are they the person who's just not going to do that? So you need someone who's super independent that's going to be successful with that manager. So you want to look at obviously pairing to the values of the company, but really thinking about the people that will ultimately work together and what they need from each other in order to be a successful team, right? And going forward. And then when you're searching, especially if you're doing your own kind of recruitment search, I would incorporate some of those soft skills into your keyword searching. So if you're looking for a software engineer, maybe you're putting Java and you're doing this, but you're going to put a word like passion or love. First of all, AI is probably not talking that way, right? So it gives you a way to kind of weed through if someone has actually written it or not. But secondly of all, most people who are, let's say, if I'm a curmudgeon, I'm probably not on my LinkedIn profile talking about my great passion for teamwork, right? So just thinking about what are those important elements and using those in your search to make sure that you're really kind of equally prioritizing those functional technical skills with what ultimately will lead to success and employee satisfaction. Happy people produce 33% better business outcomes, according to Gallup. So to me, that's a top priority.
I love that because you're reminding me of a statistic. Glassdoor, according to Glassdoor, 91% of US managers prioritize cultural fit over skills and experience.
Yeah.
And they also note that building your culture around core values is essential, something that both of you have touched on, the values that person, that individual brings, right? So how do you prioritize really culture over skills, and or can you assess both for a cultural fit? I'm going to toss that to Kelly and then back to you, Jen.
Yeah, I think you can actually structure for both skills and cultural fit personally. And there's a variety of different ways that you can do it. I think, first of all, you just have to be committed to doing it, number one. And so I'll just say that I live in a world now where I work with people who they're being interviewed all the time by organizations. And I'm really dumbfounded by some of the interviewing processes right now that are happening. So it's really kind of shocking. And I think there's like it's sort of a reaction to some of the things that I think are happening in AI and people getting through applicant tracking systems. But what I want to say most importantly is I think it really starts with number one, what does that person need to do in the job? And do you have that defined? Then I think back to what Jen said is, what is the culture? What are the core values? Like, how is that distinguished? Because if all of that isn't predefined, it's difficult to create an interviewing system or structure that's going to help you figure out whether or not that candidate is or isn't those things. So that's number one. Then you really, in terms of skill, right? Like I think Jen referenced it really well. Like you can test for technical skills. Like you can see whether someone can do Java or someone can do, whatever it might be. But I personally, I like the idea of an experiential assignment. And what I mean by that, and I've seen this taken a little bit too far in some organizations. So I use this loosely, right? I like to see if a person can do parts of the job. So for example, in my previous role, building an executive recruiting organization, and I do now too, is I'm sure most people on this call, like we're very technology heavy in everything that we do, right? So whether Airtable's connected to MailChimp, that's connected to Squarespace, that's connected to like all those things. And I also am a very fast mover. So one of the things I did in my interview process is I actually had people get on Zoom and I gave them control of my computer and I asked them to do things on my computer to see if they could actually do them. Because I had people that said they could do Google Drive and things like that, and they did not know how to do Google Drive or the Google Suite. And so that was really helpful just to see how quickly and like where did their minds go. And so that's kind of a skill-based way to see whether someone can do something. In terms of core values and culture, I've created, a core values interview. You could also call it a culture interview, right? Where you specifically are, I honestly almost believe you could just do the core values interview and be able to figure out whether or not that's the best person, because I think in some ways, all the rest of it doesn't matter. Like you can teach the other stuff. But the other thing too, and I don't know the exact answer to this, but there's some real validity around being with a person long enough to get to know who they are as a person. Because some people are really good at being able to give the answers. And so I know in my situation at Keller Williams, in that process, we saw people multiple ways, multiple times with multiple people. So that by the time we kind of got to the end of the process, we felt like we knew that person really well. We used some behavioral tools that were helpful. So I think it's really thinking about it ahead of time, but also not to have a long process just for the sake of having a long process. It being very strategic, like what you're asking and what you're doing.
That
Can
makes
I
sense.
add on to this too, Kenya? Because this is such a
Sure.
point, Kelly. You're onto something, and you mentioned values-based interviewing. Lominger or Corn Ferry have they'll call it behavioral interviewing, using behavioral competencies. So that's something that you could do a quick search up and look for, 5 great behavioral competency questions. Use that specific term, because what you're going to find are interview questions that are pretty impossible to gamify or kind of AI, right? You can't give a canned answer when someone's asking you to tell them about a time when, right? Is usually how that would begin. Tell me about it. Hey, Kelly, tell me about a time when, you let down one of your internal clients, and how did that go? Tell me about how you resolved it, right? It's hard to be like, you're going to find out, you're going to get to hear their thought processes. You're going to see how they react when they're asked something unexpected. Hello, that's a great way to test for whether or not they can deal well with things like ambiguity, right? So again, I think if you're coming from that place of, it's the pre-work, right? Like, what are your values? What are those cultural elements that you're looking for? Once you get that really dialed in, it's easy then to kind of go, okay, these are the kind of questions I need to seek in order to, you could just reverse engineer it.
One thing I love to ask on the core values, y'all, because I think that's really, it's not meant to stump people, but I think it really helps. I always ask them, whether it's the core value or a guiding principle, I always ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not resonating at all and 10 being it resonates fully, like how much does that core value resonate with them? And then I like to ask them for an example, both personally and professionally, right? Because if you don't believe in giving back to the community, it's going to be really hard to come up with an example. And you can see people's faces too, when they're like, well, I kind of like, that's a 5, you know what I'm saying? Where it's, you want it to probably be a 7 or an 8, right? So sometimes I feel like that's a good way ascertain like the reaction that someone has on some of this stuff.
What I love about this is you're humanizing the process, right? I know we've talked about AI and technology, but you're still bringing back that human component, which is tell me about who you are. And show me, right? As much as you can during this short moment of getting to know someone during the interview process. So Jen, I wanted to ask you, what are some practical steps that startups can take to build more diverse candidate pools? Now, where I'm going with this question is diversity, equity, and inclusion have been weaponized. No matter what side of the fence you're on, there are some understandings of what DEI actually means, what it brings to the table, several dimensions of diversity from gender to ageism, ability, and there's race and ethnicity as well. But there's several components that make up what a diverse candidate can look like, or a diverse pool of candidates can look like, from diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. How are you navigating, or how would you advise a startup to navigate looking for candidates that offer diversity, that are bringing value, and are qualified for the roles that they are applying for?
It's such a good question, and thank you for asking. And obviously, right now we've all heard in the news. There's a lot about DEI, kind of the idea of it being challenged. And to me, that just signals that it really falls on us now, and it always has. If we're being honest, we can't wait for someone else to decide these things for us. So, not to continue to beat the drum of values, but coming back to the value proposition that you created. Let's say one of your values for your organization is, let's say inclusive leadership. This is important to us. We're always, whether that's age or race or location or whatever, this is important to us. Okay, great. But then, as Kenya said, show me, right? Like, how are we going to show? Before you even think about establishing your values, make sure that you can put your money where your mouth is. I'm going to show up this way. And when I think about diverse candidate pools, 100%, the name of the game is to show up. It is like any relationship, y'all. You're not going to show up just to your friend. Hey, Kelly, I need something from you today. I know we haven't talked in 6 months, but if you go ahead and do that for me, that would be great. Kelly is going to tell me to go jump in the lake, right? So, because it will not be, she's going to you only called me when you need something. I promise you, that is what diverse candidate pools especially are feeling right now, because they have been tokenized and quoted for a long time now, right? So some companies have done it wrong, where they've gone, I need this many people of this color, this many people of this gender or age to enter my interview process. Statistics and studies show that quota and things like the Rooney Rule do not actually lead to the success that you're looking for from a numbers standpoint. So back it out of that, back it out of your hiring process. You got to get there beforehand. So show up. So let's say if you want, a community of women who know JavaScript, do your homework, figure out where those people gather and show up. Hi, how can I help you? We're building a new organization. We're looking at, we're doing this and this. How can we support this group in your efforts to, build community around JavaScript? Oh, great. We can come in and give a talk on JavaScript. We'd love to do that. We'd love to do some mock interviews for free with your people. We're not hiring right now, but we are here for you. Show up for them. And then when you're ready to hire, you are known, you are trusted, you are someone who has way more credibility than everybody else they've never heard of, who just hits them up on LinkedIn. And so you're among them, right? You are of the candidate pool. And so it is just an entirely different thing when you go to post your job with them. They will be excited to hear that you're hiring, and they will know what that means. And so again, it's just about, what are your values, right? Like, where are you going to show up, and just making sure that you build that time in. The reality is, just from even, I'm thinking in my own head about sort of billable hours or things like that, like, where's this time coming from? What I want you to understand is you're going to spend the time either way. You're either going to spend the time up front doing the right thing and doing it in a human way, the same way you would want to be treated, right? Empathy is really all it is. How would I like to be treated by an employer or prospective employer? You spend that time, and the hiring process goes fast. And the candidate knows who you are. They know whether or not they're who you're looking for. It just goes so much faster versus if you're, oh, we didn't, and now we want to have a hire who has some kind of diversity element. You're cold calling, right? It takes a lot longer. You're having to explain who you are, what your company does. You're having to sell a passive candidate on the idea of you. They've never heard of you, right? You can mitigate so many of these things with forethought and foresight. And I think it's absolutely worth the investment of time in the beginning. You will save it in the end.
What I'm hearing there is really intentionality, right?
Yes.
Be intentional. And that's easy to do. But it does take effort to be intentional. So love that.
I hear people cycle it out of their priorities, right? They're like, well, this is a nice to do, right? Like but we've got to make the product first or we're nothing. Gosh, we've got to get, the website up or we're nothing, sure. But again, people are not a part of your business. People are your business. They will make or break your plans,
Absolutely.
period. Right? Like just, I would always put them first. Just, yeah. Anyway, I'll get
Ab-
preachy. Sorry. Feel real strong about this.
Love it. That's so great. That's great advice.
I think, can I add one more thing too? I think about diversity, that can mean so many things. The other thing I would think about is alternative entry point timeline. Everybody's looking for the same 10 years of experience. I keep using this JavaScript example, but everyone's looking for the same person who's got that 10 years or the however many years. But there's so many other incredibly talented people. When I was at Toyota, they allowed me to build a returnship program, which is something I'd been wanting to do in a large organization for a long time and had been shot down for multiple reasons. Again, because it's this huge investment of sort of money and time up front. It takes a while to get that yield back. And sometimes that's hard for folks. But when you think about some of the most talented, most loyal, most hardworking people are those people who I haven't been in the workforce for 6 years because I was caring for children or I was caring for my aging parent, right? And coming back. So seeking those people, advertising, hey, we are building a returnship program. You're asking yourself, what are the things that we can teach? And then make a plan to teach those things, whether that's a returnship or whether that's going to an earlier career talent pool where maybe there's less competition. Let's say you're a startup, nobody knows your name. You don't want to go put your table at the career fair at the college campus and be one of 75 tables who's offering less benefits and less, notoriety, essentially, less swag at your table. You want to be, how do you be one of one, right? So you go to those other talent pools. Okay, this person is 3 years out from where we need them to be. So what's our training program? Onboarding is 1 year. Again, those things will yield in the end because you're not having to go and compete for this mature talent, right? So anyway, I would just, think about what are those alternate entry points and those alternate kind of hiring timelines that might give you a competitive advantage that your competition is just not thinking about.
That's a great way to shift mindset because I do think that there are times where we think that there's an ideal profile for a certain position when having an open mind to someone who may be at a later point in their career, bringing lots of experience. Their motivation is a little bit different than someone early on with a lack of experience. It just depends on what you're looking for. So I think being intentional is super important and being open to a diverse group of prospective, hires. That's great advice. I love the returnship. That's something new.
Yeah, I haven't heard that either. I think too, one thing I just would love to say here that's coming to mind for me is that often we're recruiting through our networks. And there's a lot of that, which is great, although sometimes our networks are too homogenous, right? So back to the intentionality, which is, that is very easy to do, but it's not necessarily intentional if we need to try to diversify who it is that we're bringing into our worlds. And oh, by the way, we should probably be diversifying our own networks too. But when we rely too much on a homogenous network, which I've also seen happen, it just sort of naturally happens without the intentionality, which is what, Jen, you're speaking to so eloquently, by the way.
Absolutely.
I don't think we're talking about this today, but the only other little thing that's on my mind is logistics, right? Like I see this mistake a lot, especially actually only in the States, which is so funny. So if you're tuning in from outside this country, you're probably going, what are we talking about? But this return to office policy is such like a new fad in the US because we are like data averse. Every data point that exists in the world of HR or even just sort of people research will tell you that remote workforce is more productive, hybrid workforce yields better bottom line results, happier employees, loyalty, all these great things. Well, Europe's going to remote first and 4-day work week. We're over here going 3 days in office and or you're fired, right? Like it's ridiculous. So I think you got to ask yourself too, like, am I going to run a fear-based organization? Am I scared? And so I'm going to bring everybody here to the office, just like these weird other little people in the US, or am I going to say, gosh, you know what? Actually, best talent is more important to me than best logistics. Geez, please don't make that mistake. Gosh, I've seen it so many times. Kills me.
You're onto something there. So, once we get past logistics, once we find that right hire, Kelly, I'm going to ask you, what's the best way to create an onboarding process that's effective for a remote team? Because
Yeah,
to Jen's point, you have a greater pool of candidates if they're not all in the same area.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love onboarding, which, so I think number one is it needs to be structured, right? And it needs to be a combination of training and coaching, right? So you want to make sure that people, first of all, are equipped to know what they're doing and they know how to do it, right? So I think there needs to be a combination of this is how you do it. This is how you're going to be measured. And then that there's check-in points all along the way. So like, I think sometimes people think onboarding has to be this very extensive process, which it can be. And as you grow, it's going to be more and more structured. But I think initially in the beginning, you just need to be very clear about, okay, what's the job description? How do I make sure that this person knows what to do and that they've now demonstrated that they can do it? And you give them the feedback and the coaching. And one thing I'll just say, and I don't think we've talked a whole lot about this yet, but you are building your culture through the interview process and the onboarding process. So like, if you want to enculturize someone, you're doing it as you're intentionally interviewing in that certain process. And so you want to build all of this into the onboarding process. And so you can use that through Zoom. You can give them assignments. You want to give them feedback. I think it's like anything. People are desperate for feedback. And, we used to have these, and I know in probably large organizations, they still do really, structured performance management systems and all of that, but minimally people, and I don't have the statistics, but minimally people are seeking feedback. So I think the other thing is I get moving so fast that sometimes it's hard for me, but having a structured meeting time that you keep with your people and also in the onboarding process, right? So it's documented, they know when they're meeting, it's a certain period of time. This is what we're going to achieve together in this. And then it's a combination of all of those things. But I think it's giving constructive feedback to people and then showing them how they can improve. Because what you really want is in the first 90 days for, as an executive recruiter with my clients, I would say in 90 days, we need to make a decision. Does that person stay or does that person go? And so the onboarding systems are really intended to help you groom that person into success more quickly or help them decide that it's not the right opportunity for them, because you also don't want to keep a hire if they aren't going to be able to do the things that you want them to do.
Mhm.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So Jenn, let's just transition this to how can early stage companies keep performers engaged when they don't have big budgets? We've talked about large organizations, and we're talking about some of the smaller firms right now where budget may be constrained. How
Yeah.
do they do that and still stay effective with their top performers?
Yeah, I mean, I love just the word engaged. So I want to just like really harp on that bit of it, because I think that's ultimately what leads to employee retention, employee loyalty, and top performance out of each employee, right? Is for them to feel engaged. And so the how do I get them or, create engagement is a really hard thing to do after the hire. So I'm gonna come back to this hiring pre-planning a bit again. If you have hired someone who is not organically engaged by what it is that you do and how you do it, you will not be able to create that out of thin air. I'm going to use a relationship example. Have you heard people say, I want to go back to being friends, about someone that they didn't meet until they dated them, right? They had not established that friendship beforehand. And so it's not shocking when it turns out that they're not able to do that after the fact either. So it's again, if you didn't kind of do it up front, it is a very hard thing to create out of thin air. So thinking about, the reality, and I think this is the thing with startups too, like a lot of times we're looking strategically, we're looking around the corner, but it's also important to be short-sighted in this way and also see exactly where we are right now. Because if what we are right now is not going to engage this talent, then we might be in trouble, guys, right? Like if we're saying we need somebody, we hired this person because they're altruistic. We know they're going to get out in the community and be super involved in the community. That is wonderful when you get there 2 years from now.
Right.
You know what I mean? Today,
Right.
if the person is just doing administrative, doing lead gen for your real estate agents, then they may not feel that level of engagement and you're going to lose them. So finding out like, what is it that they need, making sure that, you might love hearing it and go, oh, I would love to hire a person who needs that. But sometimes what we want is not who we are yet today. So you need someone who can be engaged by themselves. Think of it as a solar panel, someone who can recharge their own battery based on the work that's happening today and the way that you're working today. But that can also continue to kind of grow and deepen kind of that emotional connection to your work long term, because again, that's how you're going to get peak performance. And we straight up all deserve a job that we love. Life is too short. And so, yeah, anyway, I think it's really just about that, really seeking engagement as a top priority among obviously functional technical needs.
No, that makes sense. That actually leads into a question that I have for Kelly. What are some of the common mistakes that you see companies make when they're trying to build culture? Kind of falls into what Kelly's discussing.
Yes, exactly what Jen said to start, which is, this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people don't actually ask their people what they want. Like, what do they want out of this experience? What do they want out of this opportunity? I mean, I take people through a future self exercise. It's like, do you see yourself? And let me help you figure out where you see yourself so that way we can plan our futures together. So I think a big mistake is, and I see it all the time. I talk to, a lot of people that I have in the workforce, and they're like, no one cares like what my goals are. And so they're giving me these things to do, and I don't resonate with that. Right. So I think that you can really enroll people if you know what they want, both personally and professionally. The other thing too, is I still see a lot of this, and I'm surprised by it, but it's top-down leadership, which is, we have a vision. And so now we're going to like push it on you, and y'all are going to like go execute it, versus getting people engaged. I'll just give the example. One of the greatest companies I've been in was Keller Williams Realty. And what they did so well was they did have a vision. They had a huge goal. And then it was from the leadership, it was literally brought from the bottom up, right? And we were all enrolled in achieving those goals together. And we had regular sessions around how to do that. And we were like all tied in with what our growth paths were. And so we knew individually how we could grow and how it can contribute to the organization and the actual hitting of those objectives. And so there's really nothing better than that as someone who's in an organization. So I feel like it's the, top down. And then the other one is just not telling people how they're doing, right? That's the other big gap that I see, is like people, I'm very self-sufficient, but I still want to know how I'm doing, right? I want to know if I'm doing well. I want to know if I need to improve. And not in a mean way, but just in a way of like, how do I improve and develop? And I mean, people that I talk to are like thirsty for that. Like, I talk to so many people in organizations, and they're just like, I'm dying over here. I have no idea how I'm doing. I don't have an opportunity. I don't have a growth path. I'm working 10 hours a day. And so it's kind of just basic human, like, if you had a friend, would you treat your friend that way? So it's really just getting back to the human element of like, what do people, we're doing this for our whole lives. What can we do to make this awesome together? Sorry, this is clearly my hot button.
Love it.
No, but it makes sense. That goes back to communication, right? And
Yes.
feedback. And we all need that to be able to grow. If not, you're stagnant. And so I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, so I think and people perform better when they know that you care and that you get them involved with you. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not even saying I'm that great at it, but I just know that, like, for me, I want to know how my people feel about things, and I want them to be happy in their role. And if they're not, I would rather figure out a different role for them to be in, or a different environment if they're not happy, because I'm sort of empathetic. So I'm reading their energy and I'm doing everything that I can. And then if they're not happy, just because maybe they don't like that job specifically, it's not the culture, then it's better for them to kind of go do something else. Right. So anyway, I I clearly love this topic.
No, that makes total sense. I see that from a timing perspective, we are almost towards the end of our session. So wanted to wrap with a few questions regarding future trends, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So this is open to both of you. What hiring trends do you see shaping 2025? And Jen, we can start with you.
Well, I talked a little bit about the kind of return to office trend, which is silly, hard to have a straight face about it. Honestly, we just don't like facts and data around here. So I think, right there, if you can create a, remote or hybrid friendly environment right away, it's going to give you a competitive advantage as to become an employer of choice, even if you're unknown, especially if you come out and talk about it, and I think that's something that you can absolutely, think about as a part of your values. And when you think about like the cohesion of the team that you're building, all that word really means is belonging and equity, right? So how can you create kind of an equal playing field? If you have one of the things I see all the time is like companies that will have a remote, staff, but then they're holding their managers accountable to contradictory KPIs for those employees. So they're saying like, we want you to be remote, we want you to feel belonging, we want you to, be loyal and do your best work, yet we're holding these silly metrics accountable that have nothing to do with those items, right? And so you've got to inspect what you expect, So I think building a kind of foundation of here's the way we can welcome in this kind of talent. And then, being able to take that as, okay, now let's go and hire these folks into this environment and you're going to win. You're going to win the day. Just think about what does it take to have equity? Do all of my offsites happen at the office? Do I spread it around? How do I sort of show up in other places and let these employees feel, how do I pair them together to work on projects, remote and local, right? Just honestly, thinking about the logistics of your talent will give you a competitive advantage that is just scarce right now. It is so funny.
That's so true. Yeah, so I would just say as that the labor pool will continue to be high supply. So not only do we have, the layoffs that have occurred, but as per Gallup, we have 60% of people who are not happy in their current jobs, and they are also job searching.
Yep.
So that's to your advantage if you're in the startup mode. So what I would say that's amazing for you is that there's some amazing talent available and they're open to how that can be shaped and formed. So I think, if you're looking to hire someone in 2025, you're in the catbird seat, right? Because there's a lot of incredible talent out there. And so just thinking through all the things that we've already talked about, but that looks like it's going to continue to happen in 2025. So get out there if you're building your company, because now's the time. I mean, 2 years ago I couldn't find enough talent, right? So it's really it's a great time to find a good person.
Well, I think the good point of that too, Kelly, is you're right, right? 2 years ago, we were all fighting over these little small talent pools. Right now, we're not, but people will leave as soon as that changes if they are not in the right environment. People are saying yes right now to jobs they wouldn't normally take for all the reasons that Kelly explained. And so that's another thing I would be wary of too, is to say like, I think there's a real moment of truth here happening with employers, the way that they're treating candidates, both in the interview process, but even at the application phase, really tells you everything you need to know about how they feel about talent.
Yes,
Right? Are you a number?
we
Yeah.
did not talk about that. Like, that's such an important part, Jen. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're right. We didn't touch on that, where it's like you're demonstrating how you treat your people by how you treat them in the interview process. And when you ghost people and you do sort of those things, Jen, you're exactly right. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's 100%.
No, right. It is such a big thing. It's such a miss. And I think it's internal and external, if you want to do a fun case study, you certainly look it up, but I'm thinking about Gusto, which is like an HR software company. They're still small. They're figuring out who they're going to be when they grow up, but they've made a pretty big splash. And a lot of that is some of their early hires were senior leadership roles around things like external community management. Please explain to me why I'm making HR software over here so you can do your job application. But my first hires are these like community people. They're just going out and building community like we talked about earlier, showing up. These are the people that are going to go up and show up and be those ambassadors. And it's funny, I feel like they've become a real employer of choice among their competitors when from a product standpoint, they maybe aren't winning yet. I think their roadmap is great, but there's some products that are further along, more mature, yet I'm seeing talent flock, more over here. And again, so showing up and being who you say you want to be is worth investing in, even if it's a little preemptive for the business that you're building.
Absolutely. We do have a question in the chat, and this is from our own Rose Graves. I'm going to give this to you, Jen, first, then Kelly, if you wouldn't mind answering. Do you have advice for growing companies who aren't sure how to implement inclusive culture through hiring?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, internally defining what you mean by inclusive. Does this mean, again, like equity for logistics? Does it mean, races or does it mean locations or languages? Kind of what does this mean? Because that can mean a lot of things. So I think first establishing kind of your own guidelines for inclusion and being really realistic about that. Like, let's say it's, okay, we want to be inclusive, but we only have capability for English right now until we scale our product. So it has to be someone who can speak the language and just, not to say start with inclusion by making it smaller, but just being realistic about, what does that get to mean for us in a super authentic way that we can commit to, right? And that's important first. And then that gives you a shape of, okay, well, then that leaves us with talent pools like women over 55 or whoever that, whatever that looks like, will give you an idea then of how to go and understand where does that talent gather and where can we show up and add value. So I think first, yeah, understanding where are we going to provide the deepest sense of belonging and inclusion for which talent is going to feel that feeling based on what we can offer today realistically.
It's great.
The only other thing I would say to that is 100% and constantly doing that, consistently thinking about it, constantly tweaking it as your organization continues to grow is like being fully committed to that as your organization grows. And I think you're right. Like looking at what are the guidelines for inclusion that we have now and how are those going to evolve over time and how do we continue to do that in the organization and building a culture of that.
Great. Well, do you guys like to leave us with some last thoughts? Jenn, Kelly, some last thoughts before we close out?
I would love to dig just for a second on, I know we haven't talked a ton about technology and the way that we're hiring, but
We have more time.
but I know we could do a whole hour on that in and of itself.
Yeah, we
But I
could.
want to plug this because it's another thing that I think is so funny right now. I mean, if we could do a show of hands of who's using generative AI in some form or fashion at work, I bet 100% of us are going to raise our hands. Yet it is still taboo to talk about. And I think it's fear-based. We're afraid to say, oh, maybe my job isn't as important or could be done by AI. We're afraid that's going to happen, right? It's not, right? So, but what we can think about is what is the work that only I can do? And what is the work that I can automate, right? And again, so I think it's like coming up with in your interview process, when you're offering the opportunity for someone to interview, a lot of times companies will say, here's a link to our About Us section, or here's a, link to a video on our product. My recommendation is to also include a yes guide for Gen AI. Not a no guide, but a yes guide. Let's just all acknowledge the fact we're all using it. I did an interview with somebody the other day, and the whole time they kept looking at their other screen, and they were fully on ChatGPT. And I was just thinking, well, I didn't tell them they couldn't do that. That sucks that they're doing that. But to be fair, right? Like I never said. So you could say, hey, ahead of your interview, go ahead and use Gen AI to brainstorm the answers to the questions that you're going to have. But during the interview, we appreciate that you don't. We want to hear from you. We want to have your direct eye contact, whatever it is. Like, what's the yes guide for Gen AI, both for your candidates, but also for your employees too, so that we know that it's not off limits. We can talk about it. These technologies are moving so much faster than we're giving them credit for right now. I think there's this hyper normalization happening where we're all kind of terrified. So everyone's just pretending like it's not happening, but it is. It's happening, right? So I would just say lean into it and go with it and be ready to figure out how to explain to people what that can look like with you and your organization during your hiring process and beyond.
That's great advice. Kelly?
I mean, I agree with that. I think it's back to once again, we might as well, if we're embracing it, we might as well teach our people how to use it so that we can leverage them in the best way versus thinking that they're not going to, or whatever the case might be, right? And it has become very prevalent in my domain with applicant tracking systems and resumes and things like that. And so you really have to know how to use it and how to effectively, like I have to coach my clients on, okay, when should you use a ChatGPT resume and when should you not use one? Right. So we have to be able to discern. And I think ultimately we have to be able to help our people do that. So I think kind of in closing, it's just how can we do our best, put our best foot forward in terms of hiring people and being really clear what we want. And then how do we continue to work with them in such a way that they want to grow and be with us and we continue to grow our organization through them and through that engagement. And that's really a skill that we just have to develop as leaders and business owners really throughout our career. And the better we get at it, the better our organizations will all be, I think.
Mm-hmm. The only other thing that's on my mind that I feel like we haven't brought up today is just thinking about how you're going to reach out to passive talent who have not applied. If you're going to do a LinkedIn DM, what I want to share with you, and you're probably all experiencing this too, I think each of us are, but I have to tell you, in the years that LinkedIn has existed, I have never had an inbox like the one I have today that is so full of solicitation. And a lot of it is, I'm a startup. Can we pay you for 15 minutes on the phone? A lot of times that's a scam, and this, and that. So it's easy to get lost in the noise if you are an unknown name. So I'd be thinking about how do you really personalize and maybe do it less professionally than you normally would to double down on authenticity. Like, hey, Kenya, I saw your profile. I saw you were at Equity Angels. You know what I mean? Send less reach outs that are more personal with more homework done ahead of time. I can tell this. Yeah, I can tell this.
GPT messages either.
Yeah, exactly. I can tell that you've done this. Oh, you went to Oregon State. I went to, the other competing school. Your team sucks, whatever it is, but just make it real and honest. I think that, again, you'll have a higher return on your investment of time if you're still an unknown name in the marketplace.
What I love about everything you all have said today is that you're still putting people first, no matter how much technology is there, no matter how many resources we have, it comes down to really understanding the human element. I want to thank both of you for being here today and sharing such great information with us. You guys work. This is what you do. I would encourage anyone who is on the fence about hiring practices to definitely get in touch with Jenn and with Kelly. Connect with them on LinkedIn. And we're getting some feedback here that it was a great discussion. Get in touch with them. They are the ones that understand this industry and the business from top to bottom. You've shared so many notes today. I don't even know where to start with what I've picked up, but being intentional, understanding that the bottom-up approach works with startups. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to culture fit or being able to find that right hire. But if you are in a position to start looking for building your company and bringing on talent, reach out to Jenn, reach out to Kelly. They're here to support us, and they support Equity Angels. And we're happy to bring this to you today from Equity Angels, part of our education series. I want to thank Catherine Winston for being behind the scenes, but making sure that we were visible and the webinar was able to run efficiently today. More importantly, thank you all for joining us. And for those of you who are watching this as a recording, but again, Jenn, Kelly, thank you for bringing your expertise and your experience to this conversation, and encourage everyone to connect with the two of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.